Guys in the back, you can sit all the way in the front. You don't have to sit all the way there. It's always the shy people that go in the back. Good. Oh yeah. And these are the bigger fonts. I have even smaller ones. Oh, and you actually have my thesis. Oh wow. Yeah, Jakob told me that we did some master projects. Great. So I visited him. Okay. So I'm trying to give a sort of a little bit of summary of chapter 2.
It's a bit complicated.
Well, maybe this helps.
I hope that this will help.
But we can also, if you have questions, we can email. And I also have a short paper. This can now be presented. But I still need to revise it a little bit and then send it in again before the 23 is about. And then it becomes published, but then I can also send it to you.
Som ikke laver der er du ikke en cross på siden hjemmeside, fordi så du kan genkende så du kan genkende uanset om du får tabt det. Først skal det bare hvis du vil have telefon som bliver sådan en fælles kommunikation. Men du siger, at det er ret helt sikkert, det skal vi selvfølgelig arbejde med, og det er rent konceptet, det kan være for simpelt.
Shall we start? Do you want to say something, or shall I just?
Yes, I just thought you could
give
a shot yourself.
It's in there.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So you just take it from here.
Yeah. Okay. So hi everybody. I'll be speaking English because my Danish is sort of non-existent. You can say tusind tak. I'm from Holland, the Netherlands, and we also had storm. But I was here. Anyway, so today we are 3 groups from different courses, but I hope there's something interesting in here for all of you. I titled my lecture Embodied Technology, Why the Body is Important to the Design of Interactive Technology. So today we're going to be speaking about the body, but actually not so much about the physical body, but more about how our body is very much part of the way in which we understand the world around us. So actually it's more about psychology, you could say, or about cognition, or about understanding, about how people understand or how people deal with the things in the world around them. But the claim is that the body is very important for that. And the other sort of claim is that technology and engineers and designers and computer scientists have been ignoring this for quite a while. And they've been thinking that instead only thinking in your head and the brain is important, and so we need not worry with our bodies when interacting with computer programs. Right? So that's the summary, so now we can go home. That's basically it. But I have a lot of slides, so I hope that if I run out of time, then keep this general idea in mind. So, my name is Jelle van Dijk, and I was born in Utrecht, which is in the center of the Netherlands, and I did cognitive science for my master's in Nijmegen, and there I was already interested in this theory of embodied cognition that I will speak about. And then very much later on, just finished, I did a PhD in industrial design. So that's why then was where that was the point where I tried to combine and try to see how this theory would be relevant for design of interactive systems. And for me, interactive systems are much broader than graphical user interfaces. In fact, that's the whole point of it, to go beyond the screen and to think of all things that could be interactive. And this is my thesis, and you can find it on this website, which is not really a site, but just a place where you can go on the web, and there's only one thing, which is my thesis. Okay, so in order to introduce this, and just not start with talking about theory, I'm sort of boldly claiming here that there is something seriously wrong at the moment with human-computer interaction or with human-technology interaction in general. And I'm asking, can we do something about it? If you have questions, please just pop in and ask. So what are we speaking about is what's seriously wrong. Then I'm going to introduce a theory that might help us, which is this theory called Embodied Cognition. And there's actually 3 different kinds of them. And so if you've never heard about the theory at all, then it might be a bit much to digest in just one lecture, to first hear about this idea for the first time and then already hear from me that there's 3 theories and they're not quite the same. But we're going to try. And then I've tried, only yesterday I thought that these would be the 4 keywords coming out of it. So I hope that works out in the talk today, because it's a little bit new. And scaffold traces, practices and skills. So I hope by the end of the lecture we will know what that means. And then we can try to think for new kinds of interaction design that make use of these terms. So we try to open up a new space of design that we've not explored so much before in the field of design. And I brought a number of cards, and we can, if we have time, we can have a look at them, because these are existing examples that are sort of in the direction of this embodied technology, new design thing, and we can think of whether they fit or not, or whether it's a good example or a bad example of such a new kind of design. Yeah? So let's try. Everybody ready? Okay, so what's wrong with today's technology? Well, if you go back to the old computers, this is one of the early computers, the whole idea of this computer was that there's information in the system, data. You are outside of the system, and what you had to do was to somehow connect to this digital system by putting questions into the system, and then you received answers from the system, right? So there was a strict separation from inside the system and inside of you, and what happened in between with what this guy is doing with his hands was actually totally irrelevant, as long as it led to the desired result. The right question went in, and the answer that came out was readable and understandable by the user. And actually, this hasn't really changed so much, right? So this is office work in the 80s or 90s, I think 90s. Yeah, of course 90s. And it's basically the same thing. Even if it's graphical, it's still, you put stuff into the digital and you get stuff out. But what was happening because of the visual display of information, slowly we became much more sort of immersed and sort of sucked in to the digital world. up to the point that you sit here in this cubicle and your whole world consists of what's happening inside the screen, and what's outside of the screen, where you are actually sitting physically with your body and in interaction with other people, doesn't really matter at all for your work. Right? So this is the situation of today for many people still. And that's also why you could make these cubicles, because if you look at it from this distance, it's like putting pigs in a industrial farm, right? And it's actually not so much different from that in a way. So there's all kinds of ethical things you can think about with these cubicles. But you wouldn't really notice if you were the engineer designing the interface, because you wouldn't be concerned with all the stuff around it. And you would think the only thing that matters is what they see on the screen anyway. So they can sit very close to another in cubicles and so on. Now, that would not be a big problem if we think, well, that's just work. And when we go to work, we have to do stupid stuff. And that doesn't matter. And then we get home. And then we go walk in the woods and play with our kids. And we are our own embodied selves once again. Right? But that's been changing as well. For the last 10 years, 5 years, or even 3 years, it's going fast now. We've become sucked into these screens in all aspects of our lives, not just at work, or not just when we're scientists trying to solve some differential equation, which was the old function of computers. We now are in those screens for everything, for playing with our kids. We don't play with the kids, they play with the screen, right? For teaching, for having fun. I don't know. At some point the question is, where are we? Are we still in the real world, so to speak, or are we now completely in the virtual, digital world? And is there a difference? And I think this is somehow problematic. And I'm trying to find out, how can we get ourselves out of these screens? Right? But I'm not being sort of pessimistic or what's the word? Wanting to go back to the old times when we were chopping wood in the forest or whatever. I'm not against technology. I just want to know, if we're so creative, and if we're really designers, and if we don't want to be in the screen, then we can make different things, right? We can make different technologies that allow us to interact with digital information and not be like this. Because there's something wrong with this picture. At least for me. And think for yourself that if you're a hardcore computer scientist, you might not see the problem here. But that's because you're a hardcore computer scientist. You're a special person, right? All the rest of the people in the world do think that this is kind of awkward. But then again, they don't realize it anymore, because these are the kinds of people. Actually, this is a hardcore computer scientist, but nobody knows. So, what about more embodied, and I will explain what that means, and situated, and I will explain what that means as well, forms of interaction with technology? Would that help us in any way? Well, there have been various attempts at thinking beyond the screen. So, you have in 1988 already, there was a Weiser that coined the term ubiquitous computing, which he was explicitly arguing against virtual reality, like we should not take everything we have into the virtual world. We just have to take digital information out of the computer, out of this box, and put it into our real world, and make it mix with physical objects and spaces and so on. Then you have the whole field of tangible interaction, which makes physical objects like this pen digitally enhanced with all kinds of digital properties. So that when I write, it also records what I write. When I then press the paper, the pen starts to play what I just read. These things can exist. You can just buy them. You know, the LiveScribe pen. I don't know if anybody knows this. You can just buy it at the store. So these are tangible interaction products. Then you have a whole framework, which is not so much a design. Well, it was meant to be a design framework, but it's more like a philosophy. It's very close to what I'm talking about today, called Embodied Interaction. And this guy called Dorish wrote a good book about it, so that's a must-read if you're a bit into philosophy and stuff. Then there's all kinds of designers, one of them sitting there at the back, doing skill-based interaction design. So you design not for information exchange between the system and yourself, but you design for what kind of skill am I really tapping into. If I have to follow something moving interactively with my hands, then suddenly it becomes like a dance, and a dance is a skill that you must train and practice, and you get patterns and moves and a whole culture around it, right? Like real dance. That's interesting for interaction design. And then you have other things like augmented reality, ambient intelligence, human-brain interfacing that are also relevant fields. So these refer to papers that you might want to read. You can look them up on the web. So all these technologies, they put digital interactivity to physical objects, to the human body itself, to they intervene in immediate social interactions. So not just sending each other chat messages over the web, but like we are now in a social exchange, right? We are now having a sort of in situ, as they call it, it's situated contact with one another. And I'm trying to make contact with you, and you're trying to follow my story, and sometimes you're distracted, sometimes you're with me, and we make eye contact all the time, that kind of stuff, right? So there's also technology trying to help people in doing that. And stuff that sort of digitally enhances the whole environment in which all of this takes place, in which our bodies are, in which the physical objects are, and in which the social situation is. Well, that might work. But then still, the question is how to avoid this, right? Because we could all have mobile phones in a physical space, socially interacting, and then still looking at our screens all the time, because the app that we build asks us to watch the screen and touch the screen in order to deal with it. So how to do it? So for instance, is this any better? This thing that keeps your running distance or speed for sports people. It's on my body, so it's Embodied Technology. Or this, the Google Glass, in which I would see reminders about this guy and the last conversation that we have. So that's sort of embodied. Or this, tangible objects that interact with one another, so that you can use them as sort of interactive tiles for playing, and then it will automatically give the answer to the math problem here. Is that Embodied Technology? Or this, in which I have these glasses, and then suddenly my physical world has all kinds of virtual objects as well in it. Okay, so we can't really say, right? If we don't have some words or some theoretical ideas to talk about these design examples just like that, right? We could think about how we would experience the designs that we just talked about. That's important too, right? You must always go back to your own experience or talking with other people about their experiences with the products. That's a good approach. But we might also look into some textbooks, at least, of philosophers and theorists that might have some interesting ideas about it. And that's what I'm giving you today, I hope. So, but before we go, this is the theory. This is the picture of the theory. But before we go into it, let's step back a bit. So, in the old days, when the first computers were built, and when computers became desktop computers, the most important theory about how we think and interact with the world was the cognitive theory, cognitivism, so also called, which says that thinking is something you do in your brain, here, in the mind. The mind is the brain, it's the same thing. And inside your head, in your brain, that's where thinking is going on. And then we have a tool, and that tool helps you to think better. So it's like an external thing that you interact with, you ask questions, and it gives you responses. But in the end, it's all sort of in the abstract domain, right? There's no body, there's no physical world. It's not relevant. This could have any physical form, and this brain ideally could be in a box of water. It's called the brain in a vat hypothesis that philosophers talk about. It's by Daniel Ben. You say, well, it would still work if your brain is in water, because the body is not really important for it. It's in here where thinking happens. And we usually tend to think about it that way, right? Thinking is in your head, right? That's where you think. Well, but we also have physical bodies. So what do they do? Well, physical bodies do physical work. And we also have products, physical products, that help us do physical work. Right? So product design and product engineering classically makes machines that help us to do things faster or quicker or better or more reliable in the physical domain. And there's a strict separation. So you could say, in a way, it's speculative, but there was this old philosophical problem which is called the mind-body problem. Don't know who has ever heard of that problem, the mind-body problem? So it's the idea, how can this relate to each other? Because this is of a totally different nature. This is like mind stuff and this is physical stuff, and how does it connect? It's an old philosophical problem, but you also see it in the way we have set up our engineering departments, right? There's physical people here, and there's the digital stuff, which is more like the mind stuff, more like the abstract stuff. Okay, so our challenge is really to connect these. And if we connect them here, then we might also be talking about something of a connection between mind and body. So what's seriously wrong with this? People looking into their screens all the time. If we look at it from this more theoretical perspective, we could say that computer engineers, you guys, are you guys computer engineers? Do you consider yourself? I don't know. I was one sort of. Computer engineers assume that the goal is already to interact with this digital information. That's the starting point. So they say, we have this, we're going to build a new interface for interacting with this digital information. That's sort of the starting point of the design. Already there it goes wrong. And then the problem, the design problem, is how to build the interface, the physical thing, the screen, the bits, the bytes, the mouse, etc., for my brain to interact with that digital information inside the machine. But in reality, people, we don't want to interact with digital information. At some point we want to do that, but that's sort of a derivative. In reality, ultimately, we want to interact with the world, with our world, which means that, like, I want to interact with other people, with my children, with my work, with the environment. I want to experience nature. I want to build a house and stay safe and stuff like that, which is my world that I live in, right? And digital information is quite new stuff that came in. So the question is more, what does digital information actually do for my living in my world? Instead of, oh, we have this digital information, how can we connect to it? So this opens up the scope of the problem for you as interaction designers, right? Suddenly I ask you not just to design an interface for something that is already defined as like this is this digital process and how can we interface with it? Suddenly I ask you to think about what is the application itself really for, and what does it do in the grander scheme of how people actually live and do their things that they do. So you have to suddenly think about what is actually the task or activity that this is all part of. If I make a clock application, then suddenly you have to start to think, why do people use clocks in the first place? And what role do clocks play in their lives? In work, in leisure, in interaction with other people? Right? So this kind of analysis asks for maybe a more ethnographical approach in which you really start to investigate people's practices, in which the digital information that you're dealing with, the technology is only one aspect, it's only one thing, right? But it's a sort of a side path that I'm taking now. So let's get back on track. We want to interact, we want to take our place in the world, in our world. So what's that? Well, I will explain. But supposing that this is the problem, the question is then, can we interact with computers? Can we still use digital interactive technology and have it be part of our world, the world that we live in? Or does it always mean that as soon as you start to interact with your computer, you're sort of out of here, no longer here, and then suddenly in there? You all know this experience, right? Once you start to look at that screen, you're doing it, and now you're back. But you were away, right? You were not here, right? Is that true? So you know this experience that sometimes you're away in the screen and then you're back again. Can we find something in between that you're sort of in there and also here, and maybe that it's really one, it's really a whole. Okay. Everybody still with me? Good. So the theory that might help us here is this theory that I call Embodied Cognition. And there's actually a lot of books published about it, and it has different names. So I think Anna usually calls it situated cognition. Maybe there's also distributed cognition. There's also enactivism or enactment. There's also a whole branch of philosophy called phenomenology, which has roots, from which roots lead into this theory. So there's lots of different things that sort of mean the same thing, but I will put them into three main categories later. And the idea is here that thinking is not just happening here inside our head. Thinking is what happens in the continuous interaction with the environment. So we deal with the environment, and in doing so, we improvise, we tinker, we try, we experience, and from that comes what we call thinking. That's quick, huh? It's a skill. Huh? It's a skill.
It counts.
Yeah. And if you would put us all in a long row, then suddenly he would no longer be able to do it, because his thinking is in this space, because he's so used to this setup, right? So if you would put us all in a line, then suddenly he would have to take a different strategy and go one by one again. And it would take him much longer time. So that's the thinking which is in the world. And this world is both physical objects and stuff and things, and social. It's always also social. That's something I learned in my PhD research, because I was not so much focused on the social. These guys were not here in the picture first. I thought I was dealing with stuff, and I was only talking about me. But I came to learn through the designers that I spoke with that it's always social. You cannot design a product and then think that's only one person interacting with it. Because there's always, at some point, even if the people are not there physically, they are sort of there, right? If you write a text, you write for somebody or for somebody that might read it. Okay, and this interaction is what makes this world. So if we want to design embodied technology, the technology should be the inherent part of this loop and not stand outside of it. And currently it's very often standing outside of it. So I have my loop with the environment, but then if I go to interact with my computer, I make a whole new loop. And that takes me out of this world into a new virtual world. So how to get the technology into this loop? That's the question. So there's three variations of this theory. And instead of really discussing the differences, because in the thesis work that I did, I really tried to say, oh, these are the good ones and this is the bad one. And so I'll just try to focus on what can we take from these theories, right? But I must admit that my focus is a little bit more on these guys than on that. So that one is about how you use the external environment for problem solving, so that you don't have to do it in your head, that you solve the problem in the world instead. This one is about how physical objects play a role in social interactions between people. I'm not using the clock purely to know the time. I'm sort of using it to coordinate my actions with respect to other people. And this one is about how this interaction with the world, the social and the physical, is a skill. It's like something you train and learn and become better at, just like skateboarding or kite surfing, and not so much like thinking abstractly about the problem. but I will explain them. So this was the short summary. So, distributed problem solving. David Kirsch is one San Diego researcher that did a lot of work on this, and he describes in various ways how people sort of offload a problem into the environment so that the environment sort of solves the problem for them instead that they have to do it in their heads. You could already think that calculating on paper, right, putting the numbers on paper, it sort of makes an external memory store, so you don't have to keep all the numbers in your head, and you use the physical, the spatial organization of these numbers to know what to count with what, and you don't know exactly what you're doing, you learn the rule, and you apply it, and then you use the physical paper and the writing to do heavy calculation, so that your brain doesn't have to think so hard. Reducing cognitive load, that's what he calls it. And here's some books about that you might want to look into if you like. Right? So this is cool, but it's still very much like computer kind of stuff, right? It's what computer people immediately understand, because it's what computers do as well anyway. One application of this is this interactive table, where you have physical objects and digital information. And you can actually use these physical objects here. They represent mirrors and mirrors. And this is then the laser beam, but it's projected, right? It's not real. But you can you can tinker, you can try with these physical objects to learn about refraction of light. So you, instead of thinking in your head, how would the light reflect on this mirror, or even calculating it with the numbers, you can just do it and try it and see what happens and learn from that. And what I call these objects, these interactive things like this table, I call scaffolds. It's a term by Andy Clark. I'm calling all these names and you will forget, but I'm actually trying to videotape myself, so if this works, we can put it somewhere and then you can scroll to this part and say, what was he saying? He was called Andy Clark. So he said scaffolds are the things that all blew away in the storm, right? What are outside the houses. So a scaffold is that I'm using a thing to as a sort of extension of my brain, so that together the problem solving becomes more easy. It sort of changes the problem solving for me, so that I don't have to think so hard. Next one. Completely different field. This comes from anthropology and sociology. And I already talked about Paul Dorish. He's the one that really talked about this a lot. He says, technology is part of what he calls a richer fabric of relations between people, institutions, and practices. So, we can talk about this narrowly defined, I'm solving the problem using the physical blocks. But somebody made the blocks. And when I'm using these blocks to do laser beam, maybe I'm a student, or maybe I'm a teacher, or maybe I'm the guy that designed these blocks. And all these different roles always have their presence in the way I deal with the environment right there and then. So suppose I'm the student and Anne's the teacher, and we're standing around this laser table and I'm trying to figure out, and then Anne at some point says, then this immediately affects me, because the teacher did something while I was doing something. And so this social relation that we have immediately influences my problem solving or my thinking about what I'm doing. Right? And it's not only the immediate relations between two people, but also even the institutions that we are part of, and the practices that we are trained in. You are trained to be a student. That's your practice. Right? And this practice involves all kinds of rules and norms and ways of doing that you automatically bring into the situation. So there, physical objects are much more like mediating objects between people that coordinate relations between people. And the understanding that we have of things grows interactively between people as part of the practice. Right? So when a carpenter sees something, a problem, and he stands to another carpenter, he says, "Oh dear," and the other carpenter says, "Yeah, I saw it already." We don't understand what's happening there, but they do, right? It's part of their practice. So I'm calling it application, but it's more like a research field, because the people in this field didn't do that much of design, but they mostly did research on designed artifacts. And so here you have these flight strips that flight operators in flight control rooms use to coordinate their work, planes coming in and flying away. And what they found out, because that was part of a project that wanted to digitalize this into a screen-based interface. But what they found out is that the physical properties of these strips, one is lying here and one is lying here, for instance, and here is a hole in between them. All these physical properties were also information to the people about what everybody else was doing. So you would, for instance, be busy with this strip, writing a plane is already flying in the air but still has to land. That's the kind of information that you put on it, right? So something still has to happen. Then you had to go to the toilet, so you would put it like this, and then go to the toilet, and then somebody else would see what's happening with this plane, who's doing this plane, and then he would quickly decide something, or somebody else would say, "Oh, that's Jelle's plane, but he's in the toilet." Well, I don't know if that really happened, but so they were using these objects, but once the first designs came in of how to put that into a digital interface, suddenly all that information was gone. You couldn't socially coordinate with one another anymore if there was only one screen that you would individually be working with. And the physical, the fact that you could use the physical space to put things in did work there that you couldn't do anymore once it was in the screen. So this is because of embodied performance of physical activity. Okay. Nice word. And I call all that together the idea of practice. So part of this loop of how people understand the world is that they are in a practice. You're never just there isolated from everything, you're in this kind of practice. So we have scaffolds and practice. So, yeah, there's another one. I don't even have a slide for it. How can I explain this? I forgot to find the picture. I didn't make the trace. So the third thing that also came out from both the first theory and the second theory is this idea of traces. It's in the title of my thesis, so I was kind of fond of this idea of traces. So the idea of traces is this. Not only do I use physical objects to think with and to interact with you, right? So the scaffolding power and the part of a practice idea. Also, the fact that I interact with it leaves traces, right? In this case, very literally, if I do this, then suddenly there is something here on the whiteboard. And if now somebody comes in, maybe the counter person comes in, and he knows that this board was empty, and he comes in and he sees that there's a line on it, then he knows that somebody has been here, right? So we actually use the traces that people leave, they leave them by doing stuff in the world. We use them also as information, you could say, to think with. And maybe at some point we actually start to deliberately, or it becomes part of the practice to leave these traces so that other people will see. Right? Animals do this all the time, so it's not just a human capacity. You can think of the ant trails and the ant hill and how ants follow one another and leave scent traces. It's called stigmergy, which is a nice term for it. It's mostly used in biology. But actually, something of this stigmergy is what we use as well. Huh? And you have the English word called elephant trail. So elephants follow each other in the woods. But it's also used, I believe, I'm looking at Rob for, we have elephant trails as well. Is it an English word? In Dutch it is. In Dutch they say olifantenpaadjes. And
Footsteps in the snow.
footsteps in the snow, yeah. So in Eindhoven, where Lawrence and I used to be, there is this path through the park, which is not the used to be the official path to walk, but it was the shortest one. And once 2 or 3 people walked there, everybody else started walking there, and the path became bigger because more people were walking there. So you have this kind of double loop where the more people are using this as a guide for their actions, the bigger the trace becomes, and it starts to guide even more people into doing the same thing, and so on. So this grows. So that's the idea of traces, and I think it's very important too. But no trace of it will be seen in the slides because I don't know what it's like. Final theoretical thing. Still doing fine? Everybody with us? You're doing good.
Yeah.
Kudos to you. Sensory motor coupling. So the final thing really focuses the most of the 3 theories on the body itself and on action and doing things. And there was this same guy, Andy Clark, as mentioned before. Come in, please. He said, well, maybe the task of the cognitive system, which the thinking system, is not so much to solve problems. Maybe it's not that we see something and then we have to think about it. What's happening here? We can do that, but it's really like reflective, wherein we sit in our armchairs and we start to think about the world. Right? We can do that, but most of the time we are in interaction with the world. And we're thinking about the world while we're acting in it. And perhaps the task there is to maybe maintain a kind of coordination between what we are doing and what's happening out there. And I always use the example of me and you here in a class, that maybe the main task that I have to do is not so much to get information from my head into your head, but maybe the main task here is to sort of couple myself to your activity and to make sure that we are sort of strongly coupled, that there is, and that's something you can't really, that's something you feel, right? And you feel like when this guy was coming in, it was being challenged, right? Because before that, we were strongly coupled, and then you came in. I'm sorry, I'm using you. If you're late, I'm using you as an example. Then suddenly there was a perturbation and sort of intervention in our coupling that we had, this interactive coupling of our activity, and I had to work a little bit harder to maintain it. But we're back again. So that's this coordination between inner and outer world. And the main thing I want to take from that is the idea of skill. So if you're skilled at doing something, you could say you have the knowledge, the know-how to deal with that situation. Right? It's not abstract knowledge in your head that you're then thinking about and applying. It is just being able to do what is necessary at any situation. So this is Johan Cruyff, famous old Dutch football player. What would be the name that I put here? Mieke Laudrup? Yeah. Yeah, Ben. I was thinking about Laudrup. So anyway, but being a nationalist, I'm using Johan Cruyff. So 2 Belgian guys trying to corner him. He's in the corner and he still comes out. He's not thinking first and then doing. The skill is all in his body, and it's just, he is the skill, right? And he just let himself he throws himself into the situation, and his legs sort of do what they need to do, and then he's out to go. It all happens right there and then in the flow of action. So flow is also a word that's often used regarding this idea. Let's call it skill. One application. Oh, you can't really see it. There's also one. There are a few slides that I just missed in finalizing, but I have these examples with me. I have lots of examples, so we might find it again. So there are many examples in which you really augment the body, so it senses what you're doing, and then it gives you some kind of feedback loop right there on yourself, so that you could use that feedback information about what you're yourself doing to improve your skill or to evolve new skills. So this is a person here that is looking has a camera on his glasses, and it gives him sensory information on his back. So suddenly what the camera sees, he feels on his back. Then in trying to deal with the world, maybe doing a task, maybe this information on his back will start to contribute to doing the task better. Skill. Okay, so we've sort of reached the end of the theoretical part. And the question was, we want to interact with or take place in the world in our world, instead of being taken out of our world and put into the virtual world. And the question is, can digital information or digital technology still contribute to that? Well, we have seen some examples that might, and there's many other examples that might as well. But my question for you is, of course, could you make such a thing? Right? Could you start to design such new kinds of interactions? You can start to think about that. What you would make thinking about these ideas. And my advice then would be to, if you want to design an embodied technology in the way that I've been talking about it, to connect to these scaffolds, so these things to think with, so to speak, to connect to practices, which means you have to find out what the practice is. You cannot design a practice. Practices are already there. You're changing them if you put new technology in them. But they are already there to begin with. Right? So you can no longer start designing a whole system from scratch. Connect to people's traces, or in a way, maybe you could make technology that leaves new kinds of traces that right now we can't see or produce, but through technology we could make things that leave new kinds of traces that other people or yourself can then see and use. And connect to people's bodily skills. So either the technology would afford new skills, or you would ask them to learn a new skill in using it, which would give some new kinds of interesting effects. Or you would very closely look into existing skills and connect your technology to them in some way, append them. So I try to put all these terms that we just been talking about in one picture, starting with this picture. So this was the old idea of the mind and the brain, and the computer, the mind and brain and the computer. And then we had the physical body and the physical products. And there was a strict split. Well, what I'm actually saying is that we can open this up. It's actually an envelope. And in between there's a new space. Oh yeah, adding one thing. So, the physical body uses physical machines to deal with the physical world, physical space. And the mind uses digital processes, computation, to deal with what? Not with the physical world directly. So I put here, it deals with things like rules, norms, laws, procedures, methods, ideas. You might put there as well. Right? Stuff that is social and cognitive. But it's not physical. So that's the old distinction, right? We want to see what's in between there. Okay, let's open up this envelope and see what's in between. My proposal is that here is somehow the design space for embodied technology. It has physical properties, so you might want to involve product designers into it. It has digital properties, so you definitely also need computer designers and interaction designers for it. it's about the mind and the body, but it's much more about what's in between, this sort of embodied cognition. But it's also very much social at the same time. It's about how you have your place in a social situation. Always. That's this practice idea, right? So that should be in there as well. So we get a little bit more complex. So here we have this, I call it embodied action. Embodied cognition, that's me interacting with the world. But I'm part of the social situation. And in between we have embodied technology, ET. ET from home. And then I try to put these words that we've just been talking about here. So somehow here you have the scaffold. I'm personally interacting with stuff that helps me think. Here you have my personal skills, like Johan Cruyff, the football player. Right? It's more physical and it's more personal. Then here you have the practices. It's like it's in a space, in a physical space, but it's not about the physical space so much. It's much more about the social part of it. And then here you might have the traces, where what I do leaves something in the environment that is then picked up by other people to make sense of, and so these traces become part of people's practices. Well, okay, you might put the words at different places if you have better suggestions. I made this yesterday evening, so this is my first proposal for it. But I think somehow this would be it, and we can now start to think about, can we design good products here that are not too much about the digital, taking you once again into the virtual world, and that are not just physical products doing physical stuff. So for instance, some technologies that you might call embodied technologies, because they are on the body, are really here, you know? Or this one. This is like an aid for old people to walk, right? It helps the body to walk. So you could say it's an embodied technology. But it's not the kind of stuff that I've been talking about. Right? So it's a perfectly good product and very handy and useful, and people need it. Or a prosthetic leg or something like that. It's very useful, but that's not the kind of embodied technology that I'm talking about. Or even a pacemaker, that's an artificial heart rhythm thing. Very important, it saves lives, but it's not what I mean with embodied technology. Yeah, so that's mainly also why I made this picture, to sort of say it's not that and it's not that. And Laurens was asking me, yeah, but what is it then? So I tried to put words in the middle as well, because the picture I had before had this white spot here with nothing in it. Yeah. So I guess that's it for now, and I can answer questions, and I also have brought some cards that we might discuss. So has anybody got questions? You can also think for 5 minutes first. Yeah, that's awesome.
So the kind of embodied technology you're speaking of, what kind of technology would you define let's say the console platforms like the Connect? What does it? Yeah, or the or how would you compare the Connect as an embodied technology to, let's say, the Wii, where you actually have a tangible device
in your hand? Yeah. What would your idea be? I have an idea about it, I will say, but what is your, because you asked the question, so you might have
an idea. According to your
yeah, let's try to find it. This is just a quick rerun of the whole lecture. Oh yeah, that's what. Oh yeah, then he talked about that. Oh yeah, that was a nice example. Oh, Johan Cruyff. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Oh no, too far. I hate digital technology. Anyway, so okay, let's do it this way.
Where would you place them if you had to compare them? Because I would say one of them is like developing skills. The Connect. The Connect device makes you do certain moves, whereas the Wii device, the tangible device, does not require you to have any skills. You can just move the hand
Exactly.
and not the body.
Yeah. So for me, the we is less interesting, and this is mainly older people, like my age. they don't quite get that at the beginning. So I'm tennising, doing the thing like real tennis. Then I see my kids. So that's the difference, right? It is some kind of skill. There's also a skill in doing the buttons in playing Space Invaders. So that's a whole new kind of skill that has evolved from this particular physical thing, like the joystick or the. So it's not that there's no skill, but it was not designed to be a skill, right? Whereas the Kinect, potentially, depending on how you implement it, has more opportunities for me to go into this skill part, and the we would be almost here because it's actually it's just interface commands. Like if you do this, then this will happen on the screen. If you do this, then this will happen on the screen. But the interface commands are three-dimensional. But it doesn't really add to embodied skill. So that would be my answer. But good question. Yes.
I don't quite get your distinction between situated praxis and
sensory motor coupling.
Yeah, because if you look at agents in space in general, it tends to be kind of a random sometimes. The connections between ratified, unratified. So you have to make a constant sense of meaning when acting in space.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And how does that relate to your not understanding that?
Because I think it's linked.
Mm-hmm.
So you do this kind of coupling constantly in order to make sense in the situation you're finding yourself in.
Well, in the end, I agree that they are very much part of the same thing, right? So they are here. Everything is connected in a way. And that's the whole idea of embodied cognition in general. So you could say that making these distinctions is not, they're not really differences, but if you focus only on the one or only on the other, you get certain kind of product as a design. What I could also say about the differences is that they came historically from different sources. So sensory motor coupling was largely investigated by developmental psychologists who were studying the way how children learn to grasp an object, for instance, and doing all kinds of mathematical modeling on the dynamics of reaching and grasping and walking, for instance, and at the same time also robotics. So learning autonomous robots to walk or to navigate the environment, and there you had this whole field of robotics that was trying to find out how robots could learn to navigate their environment as a sort of sensory motor coupling, learning from what you see. And it was the idea that, this maybe I didn't explain all too well. The main idea about this sensory motor coupling is that when I look and I move my head, then, when I move my head, also my visual field changes immediately. So it's a very technical thing about how perception and action are coupled, and how you don't passively receive information like a photo camera does, but how you actually move around, and then suddenly there's all this information in the world that's only there because you are yourself moving, right? This is the perception theories by, for instance, James Gibson, also a nice guy to read. But I didn't explain that just today. So that is, so there's whole books written on that, and there's no mentioning of the social. There's no other people in that theory. Then there's the whole other field of the anthropologists and the sociologists that, and I totally agree with you, they always emphasize that you make meaning in the action, in interaction with objects and others. But the starting point there is you have this social situation, you have this culture or practice of people, right? Whereas the James Gibson didn't talk about social stuff. He only talked about the eye, the light, my movements in space, and how that couples and becomes like a balance or a dynamic. Yeah?
What about social robots? Would you classify them as embodied technology?
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's two ways to go about it. One would be to ask whether these robots would be an embodied technology for me as a user of the social robot. So, for instance, suppose I'm an autistic patient, and there's this social robot that is with me, and he helps me to classify emotional responses of other people. So I get extra information about when people start to become kind of annoyed by me, and then because I know I cannot recognize that very well, but then I use the blinking things on the robot, and then it will be sort of like a personal scaffold to make sense of the social situation, so that I can better function in this practice of dealing with people in the world. And when water comes out of their eyes, then maybe something's wrong. So that's and there's actually work on that, right? So people are building those kinds of robots. The other question would be, I'm an artificial intelligence researcher, and I think the robot itself is an embodied cognitive system. And then the question is it? Or is it just a physical machine? Is an artificial intelligent robot more a washing machine, or a software program, or is it really this system of embodied action? I think at the moment it is not. There's all kinds of stories, and the researchers, it's like that, it's their babies, so they see the greatest potential, and they see things happening in their robots that I don't see. But then that's the question: could it be? And I don't want to judge on that. But so I did cognitive science, which is like artificial intelligence. So I had 5 years of reading all these books of people that try to make artificial intelligence. My conclusion is it's not going to happen, because it's a fundamental problem with artificial intelligence. But it's not this topic. There was one good piece I read once saying that ultimately it needs to be alive. And so the question about artificial intelligence is first about artificial life. And then you have all these things that say, we're making artificial life, and it's not alive. It's a program, or it's a machine. So, what do you think?
Well, it depends on how the development will be in the field of artificial intelligence. But I'm just thinking the interaction between the human and the robot.
Yeah.
Because the human.
So that was the first interpretation. Yeah.
That's very true, and they're really giving themselves to this robot. So the interaction side of it really, I think, doesn't depend on whether the robot is actually does actually have artificial intelligence.
It should do the work that you usually get from interacting with other people. Then again, even there are skeptics saying, if I interact with a real other human being, then there's things happening that I could never have with interacting with a machine. Then there are other philosophers that say, wow, that's like that's kind of sort of chauvinistic, but not about your own country, but about the human race in general. Like, give me some arguments why that would be special. It's an interesting topic, and you can say, well, we're just going to try and then see how people deal with these robots and make sense of it. That's the empirical approach. Or you could really read on these philosophies, and because sometimes they have good arguments, and they even might have arguments saying, whatever you will find in practice, it doesn't touch on this issue, which first needs to be addressed, and it will never show up in your data or in your results or in your questionnaires. So there's a problem, and it's a philosophical problem. Other questions? So we have a little bit more time. So what if you just? Oh yeah, that's a question.
I have a little nagging problem with your concept of mind, because you say mind is the same as brain, and for me it's definitely not.
I wasn't saying that.
So you said.
So that's the yeah, I said it, but I was sort of talking about the classical theory.
Could you explain a little bit about your concept of mind, because what you paint there is a brain.
Yeah. So the classical idea of mind is it's not necessarily connected to the brain, but it would be, well, the classical theory would be the mind is kind of a software that runs on the brain. But it could, in principle, also run on something else. So that it's implemented in some physical, it has a physical instantiation, as they call it. But the essence of it is not that the physical structure of it, it's what the physical things do at the mind level, so to speak. And that's also the problem for me with this view, because it doesn't explain where it comes from. It only says where you can find it, so to speak.
I agree there are different...
but I'm not agreeing with that vision. Huh? So I'm saying mind is here.
Yes, exactly. The point is, if your mind concept is not actually a tool to break up the distinction you have, because brain and body, that's or individualized cognition in the Cartesian sense is sitting in the brain. But if you see mind in the pragmatist relation, it is certainly embodied.
Mm.
Yeah. So I'm a pragmatist.
Yeah.
Okay. So pragmatism here. This is the classical Cartesian distinction, and I'm opening it up and looking what is in between there. And then once we are here, we can just throw this away, right? We don't need. These are the old ideas, right? Because actually you can say the same story about physical space. There is no such thing as a physical space. That is a Cartesian. You know Cartesian? So it's this guy, Descartes. Descartes. It's a Frenchman. And he said, mind is really different from the physical stuff, right? And he even believed that animals had no mind, so you could kick them, and when they would do, it would just be a physical reaction of the machine. So you wouldn't have any ethical problems with that. But you couldn't do that with humans because they had a mind, and that's something you had to reckon with. Now, so and then they always say Cartesian when somebody is talking in this way. So if you see that in papers, it's nice to know where it comes from. So what was I saying? Yeah, so physical space here is also Cartesian, because it assumes that I have my mind all the way there, up there, and I look at the physical world, and the physical world is already there. It's the real world, with bricks and stones and glass and windows. But then, if you take, I don't come from the pragmatist history, but I've been more reading into phenomenology, which might also be related. When you take a phenomenological approach to it, you look at the world, and then you realize that all these objects that you see, laptop, card, thingy, desk, chair, human, that's already sort of an explanation afterwards. It's already an interpretation of my experience. It's already categorized. It's already mind stuff. It is my mind being now already separate from the world and then talking about it. So this is also what, for instance, James Gibson said. That guy, he said, if I look at this chair is not an object for me to analyze, which would make it a physical, here it is, the chair. Huh? So my mind is analyzing this object, saying it has a surface and a backside and a chair, and then I look it up into my mind table, and then I say, ha, it's a chair. What can you do with a chair? I look up in my table again, chairs, you can sit on them and do all kinds of different. No, when I look at it and I'm in action, I'm moving, right? And I look at this chair, then my whole sensory motor skilled, practice-based, embodied coupling suddenly gets this chair into my visual field. And the only thing it says, the first thing it says, and it doesn't even say it, is a to sit on, which he called affordance. So it affords sitting, this chair. So I already start sitting on it. And then I have all kinds of stuff that prevent me from sitting on it. You actually have patients, neurological patients, that don't have this inhibition. So when they walk into your room and they see your bed, they take off their clothes and they start lying in your bed. Just right there. And that shows that the most basic interaction is to do what the thing affords doing. then only later I can start looking at it and seeing it as an object that is distant from me. So I guess we pretty much have the sort of the same view on this, right? And that's exactly this embodied coupling that you first have before you start analyzing. That is what you try to connect your interface with in your interaction designs. But that's difficult, huh? Because it's pretty heavy stuff. Good. I'll just give them for a second. We have a few more minutes. Yeah?
So expectations.
Can you
Where do you
take one and give?
Where do you find expectations? Because when I enter this room,
Yeah.
I might look at it as a physical space, but there's also a lot of be it cultural or expectations to how I behave in this particular room.
Expectation is like how you should behave, right?
Yeah, for instance, the table in this room affords one kind of lecture.
Yeah, you don't go sit on the other side.
Good. So where is that located?
I think it's very much in the practice part. So here.
But can I continue? Because if you go to the doctor,
Yeah.
there might be two chairs, and you still it doesn't. The doctor might not say to you which chair he prefers you to sit in, but you might have expectations. And when I visit the doctor, I have to sit in this chair, and I have to wait until he does his checklist of questions.
Yes.
So in a situation, there's a lot of expectations on how to behave.
Yeah, I think so. The basics of it are that the physical situation of the chairs is set up by people that are doing stuff in their work, in their practices, and that's why this physical setup comes to mean for you what it means for you when you come in then with your body and with your activity that you're already having, right? So if you come in as the patient, you come in differently as the mechanic that has to fix the refrigerator in the back of the same office, right? So it depends also on where you came from. That's the basic thing of it. Then I think there is stuff that is not really explained here, which is that somehow later on we have become sort of institutionalized. So more and more and more we have started to make explicit the rules that were first embodied relations, so to speak, but then at some point we have this capacity of reflecting back on it and looking at it and then let's give this a name. This is what you should do at the doctor's office. And then we have started to make little cartoon stories of what you should do at the doctor's office. And we gave these to our kids. So when our kids are first in the doctor's office, they've already seen doctor's offices, but they've seen representations of it. So so I don't say that this doesn't exist, rules, norms, laws, procedures, and methods, but it's a derivative from this stuff. This is more basic, so to speak. And then later on, that came, and then later on, the computer came to help with that even. And now I'd say, let's try to get back to where it all came from, so to speak, and plug in computers more directly into that original process, so to speak. But there will be people really disagreeing with me on that one. I mean, that's my idea and my interpretation of the theory and so on. Right? So it's not like written in stone. Do you all have a card? So what you could now think is, whether you think this example is within here, or whether it's more here, or more there, or more, maybe it's not like, these are actual products, it's never only one or the other thing, right? Products are complex things, they have multiple aspects. But maybe you could argue that it's more on this side or more on that side, so you could think about, is it more doing scaffolding work, is it doing skill, is it part of your skills, is it leaving traces, is it really part of the practice and the situation? Maybe the situation should be here in practice. Or is it just a physical thing for your body and it's across the border? Right? I put in some examples that I think are across the border. Or is it an attempt for embodied technology, but really it takes you out again into the virtual world completely? And maybe you can discuss this for 5 minutes with your neighbor. So you could explain to your neighbor what you had, if you have an idea about it. First read and then discuss it, and then discuss the other one. Shall we do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have the same cups. Yeah, we have the same cups.
The same?
Yeah.
Oh, do you have? Oh, I have more. I have more. Is there cards left?
It's okay. No, it's okay.
Oh.
I think it's okay. It's just the back side of it was the same.
Oh, so it's an error.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think maybe it is. It's not the same right? The same cost.
Oh yeah.
So we have the same. It's okay. It's interesting. So it's okay. It's different from this one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's just the sound. So yeah. Okay.
No, you have these pictures. They were just
Okay. Yeah.
but it's not good. Anyway. The little pictures on the back with the people with the things on, it doesn't mean anything. So that's a sort of distracting noise on the pictures. You only have to read the text and see the picture on the front.
Okay.
But there's a
Og jeg vil stadigvæk sige,
Så er det jo bare fra det her form, eller så er det gulvet til at sige, der er ikke stor forskel på sådan noget. Den er svært, fordi det er ikke det ligger stadig fysiske akter. Det er også socialt skills, så de ligger nede i.
Ja, og så fordi phrases er række feedback, udsætning til lige, hvor det jo ikke er feedback for, altså det er jo det, som er tendenser.
Det der med efterladt spor, det der bliver helt enig med det, det er jo efterladt. Jeg ved godt, det ikke er lang tid, men der er jeg tror, at det igen er det, jeg skal høre det. Altså ikke det, jeg tænker på. Hvis der er andre, der ser det. Ja, det kan godt være, at det skal være noget, der sker det. Escape experience, det vil sige, at selvom det er jo
der skældsgeologi fra sig, som har
Men det er vel sådan noget
Men det gamle kan
Ja.
Så justerer den så den giver jo
Ja, både på studenter, for eksempel, der stiller den her, eller for eksempel siger, at klassen kan stå en bag. Og der står som eksempel og de studenter må stå.
Det er ting, der aldrig er installeret på de her som jeg forstår, så i forhold til ting.
Men der interagerer du ikke selv meget med det.
Det er mere forsvar.
Det er jo kun det, der også
Ja, vi kommer ind til
så kommer ind i et rum og siger, at du ser en stol.
Jeg ved
Allerede det kommer ind. Prøv at tænke over, at det er faktisk en stol, der har 4 ben, det er sådan, du kan sidde på. Og så derefter, så kan du så begynde at tænke over, at det er altså, du associerer det, okay, den har 4 ben. Eller en hammer.
Jeg vil sige, det er ikke oplagt som og så med musik, der ikke er i det her. Jeg tror ikke, det er meningen, at det
Det må næsten være stort. Jeg tror faktisk, at jeg
So, shall we have a look at it, or are you still deep into it? We can discuss for a few more minutes. Did you reach sort of a conclusion? Who wants to talk for one more minute to make a... Maybe think about what you're going to say if I ask you what did you just talk about for one more minute. Yeah. Do that. Try to think. What do you want to give to the others about your discussion with it? some lesson that we can learn from your discussion. 1 minute.